Picture this. You're standing in the ancient world, watching one of the most infamous acts of desecration ever recorded. A war chariot tears across the cracked Trojan earth, cutting a savage line through the dust. The wheels bite into the ground, kicking up a blinding cloud so thick it looks like a storm is chasing it. And behind that chariot, a rope snaps tight. A human body drags violently over stone and jagged rock, bouncing and scraping across the Trojan plain like it's nothing more than refuse. The driver is Achilles, the greatest warrior alive, the unstoppable demigod, and he is pushing his horses to their absolute limit. But look at his face. There's no victory there, no satisfaction, no pride, only something hollow, something terrifying, a kind of madness. Because Achilles isn't just trying to punish the man he killed. He's trying to erase him, to grind his enemy's body into the earth until nothing remains. Not flesh, not bones, not dignity, not even memory. But here's the impossible detail, the part that turns this horror into a miracle. Despite the speed, despite the stones, despite the violence of it all, the body doesn't break, the skin doesn't tear, the bones don't shatter. It stays untouched, pristine, as if the gods themselves are holding it together. Achilles is the one unraveling. He's the one being consumed. While Hector, the real Hector, remains unbroken, not only physically, but spiritually. This is the moment a dead man humiliated a living god. And before we dive into these forgotten stories of survival, suffering, and the strange victories that happen even in defeat, if you love uncovering the hidden truths of history, hit that like button and subscribe for more long-form storytelling like this. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're listening from. Because honestly, it blows my mind that we're exploring ancient stories together, across oceans and time zones, connected through nothing but curiosity. Now that opening scene creates a disturbing paradox. In the brutal logic of the Bronze Age, the winner takes everything, the loot, the glory, and yes, even the body of the loser. But here, the dynamic flips. The Iliad forces us to watch the Greek hero behaving like a monster, while the Trojan villain dies with silent, devastating nobility. When Achilles drags Hector around the walls, he isn't just venting his rage, he's proving, without even realizing it, that he has lost the moral war. The Trojans on the walls are weeping, yes, but in the Greek camp, there's no cheering, just silence, stunned silence, because even the Greeks can see it. Their invincible leader has been shattered by grief, reduced to something wild, something inhuman, after the death of his friend. And meanwhile, Hector, even dead, is protected. The gods themselves shield him. To understand why that matters, we have to strip away the romantic glow we usually place on ancient Greece. Forget marble statues. Forget philosophers in clean white robes. This was 1200 BCE, a world collapsing in real time. Cities burned, kingdoms vanished. Whole civilizations were erased in a single generation. In an era like that, strength wasn't just admired, it was survival. And yet the story of Troy preserves something else, a different kind of hero. Because Hector isn't Achilles. Hector wasn't born from a goddess. He didn't have enchanted skin that repelled steel. He wasn't dipped into the river Styx. Hector was flesh, blood, bone, and he carried something heavier than armor, responsibility. Achilles fights for himself. Hector fights for everyone else. And that distinction is everything. It transforms Hector from a skilled fighter into something bigger, a symbol, the tragic defender. the man who knows the ship is sinking, but refuses to abandon the wheel. While gods and kings let ego drive the war, Hector is the only adult in the room. And because he's human, his fear is real, his exhaustion is real, and his sacrifice carries a weight Achilles will never understand. But here's the question: was Hector real? For centuries, scholars waved him away as fiction, a poetic invention, a character created to make Achilles shine. But modern archaeology tells a different story. Excavations at Hisarlik, the actual site of Troy, revealed a fortified city that fits remarkably well with Homer's description. And then there's the Hittite Empire, the great power to the east. Their archives were deciphered, and suddenly, history started whispering something shocking. They speak of a city called Wilusa, sitting on the unstable western edge of the Hittite world. Wilusa. That name is almost identical to Ilios, another ancient name for Troy. And inside those records, there are treaties, political documents, and one name appears that makes historians sit up straight. A warlord called Alexandru, a name that links directly, linguistically, to Alexandros, which is what Homer calls Paris, Hector's brother. That means the pressure Hector faced wasn't just poetry, it was geopolitics. He wasn't just defending a mythic city. He was the kind of commander you'd expect in the Bronze Age, standing on real stone walls, looking out at a very real invasion force, knowing the enemy's numbers, knowing their hunger, knowing they want his city's wealth and its strategic power. So how does a man destined to lose end up stealing the soul of the entire story? Why does the image of his body dragged through dust make us feel pity? Not for the victim, but for the killer? To answer that, we have to rewind the clock. We have to step away from the battlefield and walk into the palace. We need to meet Hector before the helmet, before the spear, before the final chase around the walls. We need to see what he was fighting for and what he had to lose. Because Troy wasn't just some doomed city in the dust. Not yet. Forget the ruins you see today. Imagine Troy as it once stood, a windy citadel rising above the plain, a fortress positioned at the most critical choke point in the ancient world. It sat at the entrance to the Dardanelles, the gateway between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. Every ship carrying grain, gold, slaves, timber, everything, had to pass under the shadow of Trojan walls. Troy wasn't just a military stronghold, it was an economic superpower, a city built on trade, on taxation, on control of the lifeline between worlds. And that kind of wealth is irresistible, especially to the hungry warlords across the sea in Greece. And this is where myth and history clasp hands. Because in the Hittite archives, historians uncovered a clay tablet that changed everything. It's called the Alexandru Treaty. It describes a political agreement between the Hittite king and the ruler of Wilusa. The ruler's name? Alexandru, stunningly close to Alexandros, Paris. This one tablet quietly confirms something enormous. The Trojan War wasn't just about a woman. It was a geopolitical earthquake, a collision of empires and trade routes. And standing near the center of that disaster wasn't just the king named on the treaty, but his brother, Hector. Because if Paris or Alexandru was the charismatic, reckless face of Troy, Hector was its spine, the first prince, the primos. While Paris was getting tangled in diplomacy, romantic alliances, and reckless choices, Hector was doing what rulers actually had to do. In the ancient world, a prince's duty was threefold: to judge disputes, to sacrifice to the gods, and to lead the army. And Hector is the only character in the Iliad shown doing all three, obsessively, meticulously. He isn't a warlord addicted to blood. He's a statesman. He understands something Achilles never does. War is the failure of politics. When we see Hector inside Troy, he isn't sharpening a sword. He's visiting temples, organizing defenses, scolding Paris for being useless. He's the exhausted CEO of a collapsing empire, while the rest of the board is out partying. That's what makes him tragic. Hector didn't start the fire, but he was the only fireman with the tools to fight it. And he knew better than anyone how bad the odds were. The Mycenaean Greeks were a militaristic society, a culture that glorified raiding, loot, plunder. Troy wasn't built for conquest. It was built to endure. So Hector's strategy wasn't about domination. It was about survival. And that survival wasn't abstract. Homer makes sure we see the stakes up close, because Hector isn't just a defender. He's a husband, a father. And the Iliad gives us one moment so tender it almost hurts to hear. Hector returns home. Andromache meets him. Their infant son, Astyanax, is there. Hector reaches out to hold him, but the baby cries, terrified of the horsehair crest on his father's helmet. And Hector doesn't get angry. He doesn't snap. He laughs. He removes the helmet, the symbol of war, and for one brief moment, he is just a father. He picks up his son, holds him, smiles, a rare fragment of pure humanity in a poem drenched in slaughter. And it reminds us, beneath the bronze, there's a man who would rather be holding his child than a spear. But the ships are coming, and 1,000 ships is not just a metaphor. It's an invasion force fueled by greed and glory. And when the Greek fleet lands on the beaches of the Troad, Hector has to put the helmet back on. He has to become something else. Because the age of diplomacy is finished, and the age of the man-killer is about to begin. The moment the first Greek keel scraped against the sand of the Troad, the world changed. In the movies, that moment is always shown like a glorious explosion of heroism. Sunlight flashing on shields, warriors charging like it's a celebration. But the real truth? Bronze Age warfare wasn't a dance. It was a collision, a violent crash of heavy metal into compressed flesh. When the Greeks stepped off their ships, they didn't just bring anger. They brought a machine, a system, refined by generations of raiding and conquest. These were the Vikings of the ancient Mediterranean. Heavily armored, brutal, efficient, bronze plates strapped over muscle until men became walking tanks, and standing against that tide of steel and hunger was Hector. Not leading some unified, disciplined army, but a coalition. A patchwork of allies, many of whom didn't even speak the same language, bound together only by the fear of what would happen if Troy fell. This is where the legend of Hector truly begins. Not in his final duel, not in the chase around the walls, but in the 10 agonizing years he spent holding back the end. The Iliad skips over most of the grind, because poetry prefers climaxes. But for the people of Troy, those 10 years were a slow-motion apocalypse. And Hector's job was impossible. He wasn't just fighting Achilles. He was fighting hunger, panic, diseases, the economics of a siege. He had to manage shrinking food stores, calm civilians who were watching their future disappear, and keep morale alive among soldiers who knew, deep down, that they were outnumbered. And then there's the violence. In this era, there were no drones, no rifles, no killing at a distance. If you wanted to end a man, you had to stand close enough to smell him, to hear his breath, to feel his blood hit the dirt. The primary weapon was the spear, a long ash shaft tipped with bronze. And when two lines of infantry met, it wasn't elegant. It was a crushing shove, a desperate press forward known as othismos. Bodies jammed together like bricks in a collapsing wall. Men trampled, men suffocated. Men stabbed wherever armor didn't meet. And Hector stood at the front of it, day after day, because that's what leadership meant back then. A king or prince had to be a promachos, a fighter in the fore. If he retreated, the line broke. If he fell back, the army collapsed. So Hector never had the luxury of hiding in a command tent. He was always there, always exposed, always bleeding. And that takes a psychological toll we rarely talk about. We always describe Achilles as rage personified. But Hector wasn't rage. Hector was hypervigilance. Because defensive war is far more terrifying than offensive war. The Greeks could lose a battle and retreat to their ships. They could sail home. Hector couldn't. Behind him were the walls, and behind those walls were his wife and his child. So every spear he blocked wasn't just saving his own life. It was preventing Andromache from being dragged away in chains. It was preventing Astyanax from being thrown from the battlements. That knowledge sits on your chest like a stone. And still, Hector held. The Greeks were terrifyingly efficient, led by warlords like Agamemnon, champions like Diomedes, men who treated slaughter like a profession. And yet the Trojans had something powerful on their side: the terrain. Troy was built on a hill, engineered to endure. Its walls were not symbolic. They were real fortifications designed to survive assault. And Hector used the plain outside the city like a weapon. He turned the plain of Scamander into a kill zone. He refused to let the Greeks fully encircle Troy. He led sorties, fast, brutal counterattacks, designed to burn Greek ships and break supply lines. This wasn't passive defense. This was aggressive defense. Desperate tacticians don't just hide behind walls, they strike. And Hector struck again and again, keeping the invaders unstable, bleeding, exhausted. But then, the Myrmidons arrived, Achilles' elite shock troops, disciplined, fast, terrifyingly calm. When they entered the fray, Trojan lines often buckled. And in those moments, when everything threatened to collapse, Hector's true power emerged. Not magic, not divine blood, presence. He would throw himself into the breach, not rallying men with promises of gold, but with one simple reminder: look behind you. That's your home. That's your family. That's what they'll take if you break. Hector became the living banner of Troy, but deep down, he knew. He wasn't stopping the flood. He was plugging holes in a dam that was doomed to burst. The enemy was too many, and Achilles, the storm, was still waiting in the wings. And here's the cruel irony. While Hector was bleeding in the dust, holding the line against impossible odds, where was the great champion of the Greeks? Where was Achilles? He was sitting in his tent, playing a lyre, refusing to fight. Why? Because his feelings were hurt. The Greek king, Agamemnon, insulted him and took his war prize, a woman named Briseis. So Achilles, in a fit of divine petulance, decided to let his own allies die to prove a point. This is the menes, the rage Homer sings about. And it isn't noble, it isn't heroic, it's selfish. A narcissistic tantrum from a man who knows he can't be touched. Now compare that to Hector. Hector knows the prophecy. He knows Troy is destined to fall. He's heard the whispers. He knows he likely won't survive this war. A rational man would run. He could have taken Andromache and Astyanax and slipped out the back gate into the mountains of Ida. He could have lived. But Hector stays, and scholars have a name for this: heroic fatalism. The decision to act righteously even when the outcome is guaranteed to be disastrous. Achilles fights to be remembered forever. Hector fights because if he doesn't, his wife becomes a slave, his son becomes a corpse. And that's why Hector hits the modern mind so hard. We can't relate to a demigod dipped in the river Styx. That's superhero fantasy. But we can relate to a man who is terrified, exhausted, outnumbered, yet still picks up his shield anyway. That's courage. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the mastery of it. Achilles is fearless because he's nearly invulnerable. That isn't bravery, that's physics. Hector is brave because he's fragile. But this section of the story also reveals Hector's fatal flaw. He isn't perfect. If Achilles suffers from rage, Hector suffers from hope. As the war drags on and Achilles stays out of battle, Hector begins to believe something dangerous, that he might actually win. He pushes the Greeks back, breaks their fortifications, even sets fire to their ships. This is the high watermark of Trojan success. For one brief shining moment, it looks like the underdog might pull off the upset, but victory intoxicates him. His cautious lieutenant, Polydamas, begs him to retreat behind the walls while they're ahead. Hector refuses. He's drunk on success, convinced the gods have changed their minds. So he keeps the army out on the open plain as night falls. And that is a fatal mistake. It's not arrogance for arrogance's sake. It's desperation. The desperate belief that effort can overpower destiny. But by pushing too far, Hector doesn't secure Troy. He signs his own death warrant. Because the fire on those ships is more than a tactical success. It is a signal. A flare shot straight into the heart of the Greek camp. And that flare reaches the tent. It finally stirs the beast. Hector thinks he's fighting a war of strategy, but he is about to stumble into a tragedy of emotion. Now the stage is set for one of the most heartbreaking cases of mistaken identity in literature. The battlefield is a chaos of dust and blood, screaming, crashing bronze, men dying in piles, and then suddenly, the screaming stops. A hush spreads across the Trojan line. From the Greek camp emerges a figure every Trojan fears more than death. Sunlight gleams off golden armor. A massive spear rests in his hand. To the exhausted Trojans, it looks like the nightmare has returned. Achilles is back. Panic hits like a plague. The Trojan army, which moments ago was winning, breaks and runs. They aren't reacting to a man. They're reacting to a legend. But history knows the secret the soldiers don't. The man in the armor isn't Achilles. It's Patroclus, his gentler, more compassionate companion. And he's wearing Achilles' war gear in a desperate attempt to save the ships. This deception matters, because it represents the blurring of identity at the heart of this tragedy. Patroclus fights like a man possessed. He drives the Trojans all the way back to their walls. He's intoxicated by the power of the armor, by the fear he inspires, but borrowed power always demands payment. Achilles warned him, "Drive them from the ships, but do not chase them to the walls." Patroclus ignores it. He pushes too far. He climbs the Trojan ramparts 3 times, and 3 times he's beaten back. He's reaching for glory that isn't his, and then the bill comes due. Patroclus's death isn't a clean duel. It's a brutal dismantling. Apollo strikes first, hitting him from behind. The helmet flies off. His spear shatters. Dazed and exposed, Patroclus is stabbed in the back by a young Trojan soldier named Euphorbus. And now he's already dying when Hector steps forward. Hector sees a man kneeling, wearing the armor of his greatest enemy. In the heat and haze, he believes he has done the impossible. He believes he has cornered the beast. He drives his spear into Patroclus's belly, a killing blow. But as the life drains out of his victim's eyes, Hector realizes the horror. This isn't Achilles. This is just a boy. And this should be a relief. But instead, it's doom. Because Patroclus doesn't beg, he prophesies. He looks up and whispers, "You did not kill me. Fate and Apollo killed me, and death stands close to you at the hands of Achilles." Hector dismisses it, defiant, desperate. "Why do you prophesy my death?" he snaps. "Who knows? Even Achilles might die by my spear." And then he makes the mistake that seals his fate in body and soul. He strips Patroclus's corpse and takes Achilles' golden armor, forged by the gods, and he puts it on. The symbolism is terrifying. Hector is literally wrapping himself in the skin of his enemy, trying to borrow divine power. But the armor doesn't fit. It wasn't built for a man. It was built for something more. On Hector, it's just heavy bronze, a burden he cannot carry. Because he hasn't just killed Achilles' friend, he has stolen his skin, and the news travels fast. A messenger runs to the tent where Achilles sits. The message is short, simple, but it shatters the world. Patroclus is dead, and Achilles' grief is so violent, so inhuman, that his mother, the sea goddess Thetis, hears his screams from the bottom of the ocean. The petty rage over Briseis evaporates instantly, replaced by something colder, more dangerous, a void. Achilles loses his tether to humanity. He no longer fights for glory. He no longer fights for Greece. He fights to fill the black hole in his chest with Trojan blood. Hector thought he killed a shadow, but instead, he woke the darkness. When Achilles returns to the battlefield, he doesn't come back as a soldier. He comes back as extinction. He refuses to eat, refuses to wash, refuses to let the blood of Patroclus leave his hands. He is no longer interested in the rules of war, ransoms, mercy, honor, any of it. He wants pain, not strategy, not victory, pain. The Iliad describes what follows not like a battle, but like a natural disaster. Achilles cuts through Trojans so quickly and so brutally that the river Scamander itself becomes clogged with corpses. The water turns red. The current stalls against the dam of human flesh, and the river god rises up in fury, disgusted by the slaughter, trying to drown Achilles just to stop the madness. That's the scale of this moment. We're no longer watching men at war. We're watching a cosmic imbalance. And against this tidal wave, the Trojan army disintegrates. These are veterans, men who have held the line for 10 years. But now they break. They stream back toward the city gates like leaves in front of a hurricane. King Priam holds the Scaean gate open, screaming for them to hurry. Terrified, Achilles will burst through the entrance and sack Troy in a single breath. Then the doors slam shut, bolts thrown, the city sealed. But there is one man left outside, Hector. He stands alone before the Scaean gate, and when those heavy doors close behind him, the silence is almost unbearable. Why? Why didn't he run inside? This isn't just bravery. It's guilt. Remember, Hector was the one who ordered the army to stay on the plain the night before. Polydamas warned him. Hector ignored him. Now Troy's soldiers are dying in a massacre he helped create. And Hector can't bear the thought of walking back into the city, facing the widows and children, knowing his mistake lit the fuse. His conscience traps him. Inside his head, a storm of terrified thoughts spins. He imagines negotiating. He pictures himself taking off his helmet, laying down his spear, offering to return Helen and all the treasure of Troy if Achilles will stop. He wants diplomacy. But then he looks ahead. He sees the dust cloud approaching, and he understands instantly. The thing coming toward him is past reason. There is no bargaining, Hector realizes. He will kill me naked as if I were nothing. The codes of civilization are gone. There is only the spear. Above him, on the walls, Priam and Hecuba are screaming and weeping, tearing at their hair, begging him to come inside. "Hector, my child," Priam cries, "do not wait for this man alone." But Hector cannot move. He is pinned between the monster in front of him and the shame behind him. To enter the city would be to admit failure, to admit he was wrong. So he chooses the only path left for a tragic hero: stand and die. Then Achilles arrives, and the Iliad describes him like a star, the dog star, Orion's hound, an omen of plague and fever. His armor flashes like sunlight on a blade. His presence is not just threatening, it's primal. And in the most human moment of Hector's entire life, he breaks. He turns around and runs, and that's what makes him real. This isn't cowardice. This is biology. A mortal seeing a god and feeling the flight response slam into his bones. For 3 full laps around Troy, Hector runs. The fastest man alive, hunting down a man weighed down by heavy armor and heavier regret. The Greek army watches in silence. The Trojan people watch in horror. It isn't a chase. It's a hunt. And even as Hector runs, he's forced to pass the landmarks of his life. The fig tree, the washing springs where women once gathered in peace. His entire world flashes by like a cruel montage. He's running away from death, but he's running in circles. There is nowhere to go. For 3 laps, the war itself pauses. Thousands of men stand frozen, watching 2 figures sprint until lungs burn and legs tremble. But the gods grow bored. Zeus weighs their fates on golden scales. Hector's side sinks. The verdict is final. Apollo, who has been sustaining Hector, quietly abandons him. The protection is gone. Hector is now truly alone, but the gods aren't satisfied with letting him die cleanly. They want to give him hope first. Athena descends. She disguises herself as Deiphobus, Hector's favorite brother. She appears beside him, steady, calm. "Brother," she lies, "let's face him together." Imagine the relief that surges through Hector's chest. After 10 years of carrying Troy alone, he believes help has finally arrived. He stops, turns, faces the monster, and with his courage restored, he tries one last time to speak like a man. He offers a pact. "If I kill you," Hector says, "I will strip your armor, but I will return your body to the Greeks. Promise me you'll do the same." Achilles' response is one of the coldest lines in literature. He glares beneath his helmet and growls, "Do not talk to me of pacts. There are no faithful oaths between men and lions, nor do wolves and lambs have hearts of one spirit." In that moment, the distinction is absolute. Hector is still human, still clinging to civilization. Achilles is no longer a man. He is a predator, and predators do not negotiate. The fight begins. Achilles throws his spear first. Hector ducks, sharp-eyed, desperate, and the bronze tip flies past, burying itself in the earth. Hector shouts in triumph. For half a heartbeat, he believes the godlike warrior has missed. He throws his own spear. It strikes Achilles dead center on the shield. But the shield was forged by Hephaestus. It doesn't crack. It doesn't flinch. The spear bounces off harmlessly. Now Hector turns to Deiphobus, reaching out. "Brother, Give me another spear. But there is no brother, no ally, no one, only empty air and the wind. And in that instant, the terrible truth crashes down on him like a stone. The gods have tricked him. They gave him false confidence so he would stop running, so he could be slaughtered. Alas, Hector whispers to himself, death is no longer far away. It stares me in the face. At that exact moment, Achilles charges. And here comes the cruelest irony. Hector is wearing Achilles' old armor, the armor stripped from Patroclus. Achilles knows that metal perfectly. He knows every seam, every plate, every weakness. He spots the small gap at the collarbone, the gullet, where the plates don't meet. And he doesn't slash wildly. He drives the spear point with cold precision straight into that opening. Hector collapses, crashes into the dust he defended for a decade. The spear misses his windpipe, leaving him just enough breath for final words. He doesn't beg for his life. He begs for his body. I beg you, he gasps. Don't let the dogs of the Greek camp eat me. Achilles sneers, saying he wishes he could eat Hector raw himself. And with his final breath, Hector delivers a prophecy disguised as a curse. Paris and Apollo will destroy Achilles at the Scaean Gate. Even dying, Hector sees the future clearly. Then his soul slips away, leaving behind youth, manhood, everything. The real Hector is gone. Now only a husk remains, and Achilles is about to do something that will shock the ancient world. The duel ends, and the spell is broken. The Greek soldiers rush forward like scavengers. They surround Hector's corpse, admiring his size, his beauty, and then, one by one, they stab it. They laugh nervously, saying, "Look, Hector is much softer now than when he was burning our ships." It's pathetic. Small men trying to feel tall by mutilating a giant. But Achilles shoves them aside, because he isn't finished. Killing Hector didn't end his hatred. It only sharpened it. He grabs his knife and slices the tendons behind Hector's ankles, right between heel and bone, threads straps through the wounds, ties them to the back of his chariot, leaving Hector's noble head to drag. And then he whips the horses. The chariot jerks forward, and Hector, Prince of Troy, defender of the city, father of Astyanax, is dragged away like trash. Dust rises like a funeral shroud. His dark hair fans out in the dirt, and inside the walls of Troy, life is still tragically normal. Andromache doesn't know. Homer gives us a scene so heartbreaking it feels like cruelty. She's in her room weaving a purple web, embroidering flowers into it. She calls to her handmaidens, telling them to place a large tripod over the fire. She wants a warm bath ready for Hector when he comes home. A warm bath. That tiny detail is devastating because it proves she expects him to return. She's preparing comfort for a man who is already being torn apart by stone. Then a sound cuts through the palace. Not battle, a scream. Hecuba has seen the chariot from the walls. Her wail is so sharp Andromache drops her shuttle. The weaving falls to the floor. My heart leaps to my mouth, she whispers. My knees are frozen. She knows. She runs, bursting through the palace, racing to the wall like a madwoman, and she arrives just in time to see the chariot disappearing toward the Greek ships. She sees the body bouncing, and the world goes black. She faints, and as she falls, the wedding headdress she wears, a gift from Aphrodite, slips from her head and crumbles into the dust. It's the symbolic death of Troy. The walls still stand, but the city is already dead. And yet, in the middle of this despair, a strange miracle happens. Achilles leaves Hector face down in the dirt, intending the dogs and birds to eat him. But the gods intervene, Aphrodite drives the dogs away day and night. Apollo covers the body in a golden cloud, so the sun cannot rot the skin. And even as Achilles drags Hector around Patroclus's tomb for 12 days, the flesh heals, the skin remains smooth. The gods are making a statement. You can kill the man, but you cannot kill his dignity. 12 days pass. 12 days of silence inside Troy. 12 days of madness in the Greek camp as Achilles continues to abuse the corpse. But on the 12th night, something impossible happens. The gates of Troy creak open. An old man slips out into the darkness on a simple wagon pulled by mules. It's King Priam, unarmed, no guards, carrying only gold and fine fabrics, and he drives straight into the heart of the enemy camp, a place where every Greek soldier wants him dead. If Hector's last stand was the peak of physical courage, this journey is spiritual courage. Guided by Hermes, Priam passes through Greek sentries like a ghost. He reaches Achilles' shelter, pushes inside, and finds the man who murdered his son sitting quietly, eating dinner. What happens next is so profound, it became the gold standard for forgiveness in Western culture. Priam doesn't attack, doesn't scream. He kneels. The king of Troy falls to his knees and wraps his arms around Achilles' legs. He takes the hands still stained with Hector's blood, the hands that butchered his children, and he kisses them, and he whispers, "Think of your father, Achilles. He's old, like me, but at least he hears you're alive and rejoices. I have no such hope. I have endured what no one on earth has ever done before. I put to my lips the hands of the man who killed my son." The effect on Achilles is immediate, shattering. The mention of Peleus, his father, strikes through his rage like lightning. For the first time, Achilles doesn't see a Trojan. He sees his own father in the face of this trembling old man, and that supernatural rage, that menace, vanishes, replaced by something human: grief. Achilles gently pushes Priam away, not in anger, but in shared sorrow. And then they weep together. Priam for Hector, Achilles for Patroclus, and for the father who will one day mourn him. In that tent, surrounded by weapons, the lines between winner and loser dissolve. There are only two human beings, united by mortality. This is Hector's final victory. Even as a corpse, he achieves what armies could not. He forces Achilles to become human again. Achilles raises Priam up, offers him a seat, and orders servant women to wash Hector's body and wrap him in the tunics Priam brought. So the old king doesn't see the mutilation and collapse in rage. It's sudden tenderness. Then Achilles grants a truce. "How many days do you need to bury him?" he asks. Priam asks for 11 days of mourning and burial on the 12th. Achilles agrees. "I will hold back the army for as long as you require." Think about the magnitude of that. The greatest war in history pauses, not for a treaty, not for conquest, not for gold, but for a funeral. For 11 days, the plain of Troy is silent out of respect for one man, Hector. And when Priam rides back at dawn with his son's body resting in the wagon, he isn't returning with a defeated soldier. He's returning with the dignity of Troy itself. The Iliad ends in a very specific way, not with a wooden horse, not with Troy burning, not with Achilles' death. It ends with a funeral. For 9 days, the Trojans gather wood. On the 10th day, they place Hector on the pyre and set him aflame. And as the fire consumes the breaker of horses, the final laments rise. The most heartbreaking tribute doesn't come from his wife or mother. It comes from Helen, the woman who started the war. She says, in essence, "For 20 years in Troy, I never heard a harsh word from you. When others scolded me, you restrained them with gentle spirit and gentle words." Let that sink in. Hector is remembered not for how many men he killed, but for kindness to the most hated outsider in his city. And that's why, 3,000 years later, Hector is still the true hero. Achilles represents the fantasy of human potential: divine favor, eternal youth, unstoppable power. We all want to be Achilles. We want to be the main character. But when we wake up and look in the mirror, we aren't Achilles. We are Hector. We have families to protect, responsibilities to carry, bills to pay, and messes to clean up, often caused by the Paris figures of the world: the reckless, the entitled, the chaotic. We fight battles we didn't choose, against odds we can't beat, for people who rely on us. Hector teaches us heroism isn't invulnerability, it's vulnerability. It's standing at the Scaean gate knowing the monster is coming, knowing you'll probably lose, and planting your feet anyway, because it's the right thing to do. History obsesses over conquerors, but civilization is built by defenders. It is built by the Hectors. The stones of Troy did fall. The prophecy came true. But by ending his poem with Hector's funeral, Homer makes a quiet declaration. Empires crumble. Walls turn to dust. Gods fade into myth. But the dignity of a good man, that survives the fire. If you've watched this far, you clearly care about the deep human side of history. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications. It genuinely helps keep these stories alive. And I want to ask you something in the comments. In your own life, are you chasing the glory of Achilles? Or are you carrying the burden of Hector? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your answer. Thank you for joining me on the walls of Troy. Until next time, remember, the history books are written by the victors, but the best stories belong to those who fought with honor, even in defeat.